She didn't scream when her father's hand cracked across her face 3 days before the wedding. She simply pressed her fingers to her cheek, tasted blood, and thought at least the bruise will be hidden under the veil. That was the moment Eliza Marlowe understood what she was: not a daughter being given in marriage, but a debt being paid. If that hit you somewhere deep, subscribe right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far Eliza's story travels. Now let's go back to Kentucky, summer of 1818. The wedding was over before Eliza felt anything. One moment she was standing at the altar with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white, and the next she was Mrs. Nathaniel Hayes, wife of the wealthiest landowner in Harlan County, Kentucky, and people were pressing her hands and saying things she didn't hear because the ringing in her ears from 3 days ago still hadn't fully stopped. She smiled. She nodded. She said thank you, and so kind of you. And yes, we're very pleased, until the words stopped meaning anything at all. She was good at that. She had been practicing for 23 years. "You look pale," said a woman to her. One of Nathaniel's cousins, round-faced and watchful. The kind of woman who collected information the way other people collected silver. "Nervous, dear." "Just the heat," Eliza said. "Well." The woman looked her up and down with eyes that were doing arithmetic. "You've done very well for yourself. Better than the Marlowe name deserves any more, if I'm being honest." "You're very kind," Eliza said, which was not even close to true, but the woman seemed satisfied. She moved away. Eliza exhaled and looked across the receiving line to find Nathaniel watching her. He was 34 years old and looked like a man who had earned every year of it. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair going silver at the temples, and a jaw that suggested he'd made difficult decisions and carried them without complaint. He had commanded cavalry in the war against Britain. He had come home intact, which said something. She wasn't sure yet what. His eyes moved to the cousins retreating back, then to Eliza's face. "An hour more," he said, coming to stand beside her. His voice was low, level. "Then we can leave." "I'm fine," she said automatically. "I didn't ask," he said, and moved on to the next handshake. She watched him go. She filed everything away. You never knew which detail would matter. "I want to be plain with you." Nathaniel said it 20 minutes into the carriage ride without preamble, looking out the window at the Kentucky farmland rolling past in the summer heat. Eliza had been sitting with her hands folded and her spine very straight, waiting for whatever came next. "About what this marriage is," he continued, "and what it isn't." "All right," she said. "Your father and I made an arrangement. You know the terms. I'm not going to pretend otherwise." He turned then, and she saw his eyes directly for the first time, gray like river water before a storm, and entirely steady. "I expect certain things. A household managed well, discretion, the conduct expected of someone who carries this name." "I understand," she said. "In return." He paused. Something shifted in his voice, barely like a door opening 1 inch. "Your family's debts are settled. Your mother will be provided for. You will want for nothing." She looked at him for a moment. "And the rest?" she asked. He knew what she meant. The muscle in his jaw moved. "I will not force anything," he said, flat and certain, the voice of a man who had decided this before the wedding, before today, and wasn't negotiating. "You have my word." She had heard those words before. Her cheek remembered what they were worth. But she nodded because what else did you do? You nodded, and you waited, and you learned what kind of man you'd been handed to this time. The first thing she did when she reached her room at the Coldwater estate was test the lock. She didn't think about it. Her hand went to the key before she'd even fully crossed the threshold. Turned it, heard the bolt slide home, stood with her palm flat against the door for 3 full seconds. Then she unlocked it and slipped the key into her pocket. A locked door got noticed, and a noticed door required an explanation. And she wasn't ready to explain the shape of her fear to a stranger, yet no matter what promises he'd made in a carriage. The room was large, clean. 2 windows, a writing desk, a wardrobe, a washstand with a mirror, a dressing room with its own separate door. She sat on the edge of the bed and breathed. Just breathed. It was summer, and it was evening, and she was still alive, and that was enough for now. Supper at 7. A long mahogany table reduced to two-place settings moved close enough for conversation without formality. Ruth the housekeeper, gray-haired and efficient. A woman who communicated primarily through the angle of her eyebrows, had made roast chicken and cornbread and a dish of garden vegetables, and Eliza ate more than she'd intended because she hadn't been able to eat at the wedding. Too many eyes watching. At home, eating too much at a formal occasion was the kind of thing her father noticed. Nathaniel didn't notice, or if he did, he said nothing. "You've never been to Kentucky," he said somewhere through the meal. Not a question, he'd seen it in her face in the carriage apparently. "No," she said. "First time west of the mountains." He considered this. "What did you expect?" She thought about it honestly. "I'm not sure. Something rougher, maybe." "It is rough," he said. "You'll see it." A pause. "What do you know about farming?" he asked. She blinked. It wasn't the question she'd expected. "Some. My father grew tobacco before the finances became complicated. I understand seasonal cycles. Healthy soil. I can read a ledger." She stopped, then added, because something in her was tired of performing smallness. "I'm not helpless." He looked at her. A long, level look, the kind that took in more than the words. "I didn't think you were," he said. "You thought something," she said before she could stop herself. His eyebrows rose approximately 1 millimeter. She felt the cold thread of old instinct too far pull back, apologize, and then she didn't. She held still. She waited. "Fair enough," Nathaniel said, and went back to his supper. Eliza sat with the strange ringing sensation of having said a sharp, true thing and not been punished for it. She ate another piece of cornbread. He knocked at 10 o'clock. 2 knocks measured and quiet. She was sitting at the writing desk doing nothing in particular, and her body went still before her mind caught up. She crossed to the door, opened it. He was in plain shirt sleeves, no jacket, candle in hand, and he looked different without the wedding formality, more human, more tired. He stood in the doorway without moving to enter. "I want to speak with you," he said. "If you're willing." She stepped back. He came in and stood near the window, keeping the full width of the room between them, and she understood this was deliberate. "About the arrangement," he said. "What I said in the carriage. I want to be more specific." "All right." "When I said I expected the duties of a wife, I meant the household, the social obligations, the public arrangement." He looked at the candle rather than at her. "The private aspects. I won't press you on that. Not now. Not until—" He stopped. "Until what?" she asked. "Until it's something you're choosing," he said, "as well as something you were given." Eliza stared at him. In 23 years, no man had said anything to her that sounded like that. Not her father. Not the men her father had paraded in front of her before the debts got bad enough that he stopped pretending she had options. Not anyone. "That's not how these arrangements work," she said carefully. "No," he agreed. "Then why?" How was quiet a moment. "Because an arrangement has terms," he said. "But a marriage has a person in it, and I find I'm not comfortable pretending those are the same thing." She looked at him. She was trying to find the angle. There was always an angle, always a price attached to the generous gesture, always the thing he'd want back later. She looked and couldn't find it, which meant either it wasn't there or she wasn't looking hard enough. "I'll think about that," she said. "That's all I'm asking," he said. He turned to leave, and that was when he saw. She knew the exact second it happened. She saw his eyes move to her arms. She was in her nightgown, thin summer cotton short sleeves, and she simply hadn't thought, and she saw the stillness come over his face. The old scars on her forearms had been there so long she almost forgot about them. Years of careful hands and careless rages. Her father's wedding gift spread across years of her childhood and youth, healed into pale ridged lines that she'd learned to cover and uncovered only alone. The bruising on her upper arm was newer, less than a week old, fingerprint-shaped. A farewell from her father, who had been displeased with the financial terms of the arrangement. She hadn't thought about the nightgown. The room went very quiet. "Eliza." His voice had changed. Still quiet, still controlled. But underneath the control, something had shifted. Something had hardened, and it was not aimed at her. She could feel the direction of it, the way you could feel wind direction before you saw it move the trees. He was not angry at her. That was new. That was so new she didn't know what to do with it. "They're old," she said quickly. "Most of them. She stopped. She had been about to say "I'm fine." She said it 30 times a day. "I'm used to them." "Don't do that," he said. She looked at him. "Don't manage me," he said quietly. "Don't give me the answer you think I need, so I'll leave the room easier. Just—" He stopped. A breath. "Tell me who." She said nothing. "Your father," he said. Not a question. She looked at the wall. He stood there and let the silence hold what needed holding, and when he finally spoke again, his voice was even, deliberate. "I am going to ask you something. I want a straight answer." "All right." "Did he hurt you before the wedding recently?" She thought about lying. Thought about the practiced deflection, the careful minimizing. Looked at his face. 3 days before, she said. He was displeased with the financial terms. He felt he should have received more. She paused. He said goodbye in the way he usually said things. The muscle in Nathaniel's jaw moved like something living. "He will not come here," Nathaniel said. "You can't promise that." "He still has outstanding debts," Nathaniel said. "Not to me, to others. I have the names, the amounts, the creditors. If Gerald Marlowe sets foot in Harlan County, every man he owes money to in 3 states will know his location by the following morning." He looked at her directly. "I am a thorough man. I don't leave flanks unguarded." Eliza absorbed that. "You knew," she said slowly. "About his debts. About him. I knew the financial situation," he said. "I investigated before I agreed to any arrangement. That's standard." His voice shifted slightly, went lower. "I did not know this, not until tonight." "Would it have changed things?" she asked. "If you'd known." He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said simply. She waited. "I would have moved faster," he said. Something cracked in her chest. Small. Like the first fracture in ice, not breaking, not yet, but changed. Changed in a way that couldn't be unchanged. She looked away before he could see her face do something she wasn't ready to explain. "Go to sleep," Nathaniel said. His voice had gone careful again. Not tender, he was not a tender man, she was beginning to understand, but he was a precise one, and right now he was being very precise about giving her space. "Lock the door if it helps. I'll have Ruth bring breakfast to your room." He moved toward the door. "Nathaniel." He stopped. She hadn't planned to say anything. She didn't know what she wanted to say. She had needed to stop him one more second to stand in the same room with a man who had just told her he would have moved faster and not run from it. "Why does it matter?" she asked. "To you. I mean, why does any of this matter? You have what you wanted. The arrangement is done. You didn't have to—" She stopped, started again. "You don't have to be kind." He stood in the doorway for a moment. "No," he said. "I don't." He left. She stood in the silence he'd left behind and listened to his footsteps go down the hall, steady and unhurried. And she walked to the door and turned the key in the lock, and she sat on the edge of the bed, and she pressed her hands flat against her knees, and she tried to figure out what had just happened to her. She did not cry. She was not ready to cry. Crying meant believing something had changed, and she had believed that before, and she had the marks to prove where believing had gotten her. But her hands were shaking, slightly, in a way that was not fear. She did not know what else to call it. Not yet. Morning. Pink light through the east windows. Birds going loud in the oak trees. Eliza awake at 6, which was unusual. She generally came out of sleep fighting alert for sound and movement, and the particular quality of silence that meant something was wrong. She lay still for 30 seconds, checking the room, checking herself, accounting for everything. She had slept through the night. She hadn't done that in 4 years. Ruth knocked at 7 with a breakfast tray. Eggs, toast, blackberry jam. "How did you know?" Eliza asked, because blackberry was her favorite, and she had mentioned this to no one. Ruth's eyebrows moved. Nathaniel said to ask you. I guessed. You guessed correctly. I usually do, Ruth said and left. Eliza sat with the tray in her lap in the morning light and ate every bite of it, and then she got dressed and went downstairs. Nathaniel was already gone out since before first light. Ruth informed her something on the north pasture. The house was quiet. Hers for the morning. She walked through it slowly. Not mapping exits this time, or not only that. She was listening to the house. What it felt like. Whether it had the particular held breath quality of a place where bad things happened, the way some rooms did, the way her father's study had always had it. The Coldwater estate felt like a place that worked. That was the only way she could describe it. It felt purposeful and real, and not frightened of itself. She found the study. Floor-to-ceiling books. Farming manuals, military histories, land law. A worn-spined Shakespeare. And in the corner of the second shelf, tucked in like something personal rather than decorative, Jane Austen. 2 of them. She stood looking at them for a long moment. Then she took down Sense and Sensibility and went to the chair by the window. She was 40 pages in when she heard his boots on the porch. She looked up. Through the window she saw him cross toward the house, still in work clothes, carrying his hat, talking over his shoulder to one of the farmhands. He looked different in daylight on his own land. Less contained. Like a man who knew exactly where he was. He came through the front door, stopped when he saw her. She looked at the book in her hands, then at him. I should have asked. Those are your books now, he said. This is your house. He came in and dropped into the opposite chair, pulled off one boot, then the other, leaned back. His eyes went to the cover. Austen, good taste. You've read them. My mother's copies, he said. She insisted. Said any man who didn't understand women was a useless creature in any century. Eliza felt something shift in her chest. She sounds formidable. She was. Something moved through his voice, not grief exactly, but the shadow of it worn smooth with time. She'd have liked you, I think. She looked back at the page. Read the same sentence 3 times. Nathaniel. What you said last night. She kept her eyes on the book. Did you mean it? A pause long enough that she looked up. He was watching her with those steady gray eyes, and his face was careful and still, but something underneath it was not still at all. I am not easy to live with, he said. I keep long hours. I have a temper, though I keep it controlled. I'm not a man who talks about his feelings for entertainment. A pause. But I meant what I said. Every word. She held that. My father said he would provide for us, she said. Her voice came out flat, factual. She had learned to talk about this the way you talked about weather, as something that happened, not something that was done. He said we would be cared for. He was generous when he wanted something. She smoothed the page under her thumb. When he didn't want something, he expressed that differently. Nathaniel didn't look away. I know. You don't know, she said quietly. You know the financial records. You don't know what it sounds like. The silence stretched. No, he said. I don't. He said it like a man acknowledging a wound he hadn't earned and wouldn't try to. Words are cheap, he said. I know that better than most. So don't take my word for anything. Watch. Give it time. Judge what you see. He turned his hat in his hands. That's all I'm asking from you. She looked at him for a moment. Then she went back to her book. He stayed. Didn't read. Didn't work. Just sat in the chair across from her in his stocking feet, while the summer heat climbed, and Ruth rattled pots somewhere in the back of the house, and the fields outside went green and gold and vast. She turned a page. She realized slowly, and with great suspicion, slightly less afraid than she had been yesterday. She didn't trust it. She had learned not to trust the good hours. But she noted it, filed it away, like everything else. The way she noted 10 minutes later when Ruth came to the doorway of the study and told Nathaniel there was a problem with the fencing on the east field, and he said, I'll be there in a minute, and then didn't move for another 5 minutes, just sat there in the morning quiet across from his wife, who wasn't yet anything close to his wife, letting her read. She didn't say anything about those 5 minutes, but she noticed them. It was the jar that broke first. 4 days into the marriage, Eliza was in the kitchen, helping Ruth with the preserves she had offered, because she needed something to do with her hands. Because idle hands in a new place meant her mind started running calculations. She didn't want to run, and she reached for a jar on the high shelf, and it slipped. It hit the stone floor and shattered. She flinched before the sound had finished. A full-body flinch hard, her hands coming up, and then she heard his footsteps. He'd been passing through the back hall, just passing, not even in the kitchen, and she turned and found him in the doorway, and she was already bracing, already pulling inward, already building the apology. "Are you cut?" he asked. She looked at her hands. "No." "Step away from the glass." He got the broom himself, swept it himself, handed her a cloth for the floor without comment, without tone, without a single word about the jar or the cost, or what it said about her, that she couldn't hold on to things. Afterward, he refilled his water cup and said, not looking at her, "Ruth buys them by the crate. You'd have to work at it to make a dent." She stood with the cloth in her hands. She understood what he was saying, not about jars. "Thank you," she said. "Stop thanking me for ordinary things," he said. Not unkindly, just directly the way he said everything. "I don't need thanks for ordinary." "I'm not used to ordinary things being ordinary," she said. He turned, looked at her, and in that moment, Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost stopped believing it existed, the specific, terrifying sensation of being seen. Not managed, not assessed, not judged for usefulness. Seen. "No," Nathaniel said quietly. "I expect not." He left. She stood in the kitchen for a long time. Then she turned to Ruth, who had been quietly pretending to be invisible in the corner, and said, "Can I help with the bread?" Ruth handed her an apron without a word. Eliza pushed up her sleeves, both of them without thinking, without the usual half-second of calculation about whether anyone would see, and put her hands in the dough. And worked. It was Ruth who told her about Margaret. They were in the garden cutting herbs for the evening meal, and Ruth said it the way Ruth said everything plainly, without softening as information. "He had a wife before you," she said. "Margaret. 4 years ago. She died in childbed. The baby too." Eliza went still. "He doesn't speak of it," Ruth continued. "But you'll see it in him if you pay attention. He built this house for her," Ruth said. "The East Addition, this garden, the oak trees she liked afternoon shade. He planted every one of them himself. She clipped a stem of thyme. Hasn't changed a single thing since." Eliza looked at the oak trees, at the shadows they threw. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Ruth looked at her directly. "Because you're watching him," she said, "trying to figure out if he's safe. And I've known him 11 years, and I know what he is, and I think you deserve to know it sooner rather than later." "Which is what?" "What?" Eliza asked. "A man with a larger heart than he shows," Ruth said. "And more grief in him than he admits. And more patience than you're used to receiving." She went back to her cutting. "Don't mistake the quiet for cold," she said. "People always make that mistake with him." Eliza stood in the garden in the afternoon shade of the oak trees a dead woman had loved, and she thought about that for a long time. That evening, Nathaniel found her in the sitting room, writing a letter to her mother. She covered it slightly when he came in, then felt foolish and moved her hand. He sat down across from her and didn't look at the letter. "Tomorrow, I want to show you the full estate," he said. "The accounts. There are things you should understand if you're going to manage the household books." She looked up. "You want me to manage the accounts? You said you could read a ledger." "I can." "Then yes." He stretched his legs out, and she could see the tiredness in him. Honest physical, a man who had worked a full day without apology. "The domestic accounts. Household staff, wages, kitchen, garden. I handle the land. It divides cleanly." "What if I make errors?" she asked. "We find them and fix them," he said. As if it were that simple. As if errors were just things that got fixed. She looked at him for a moment. "All right," she said. He nodded. "Then, I've arranged for funds to go to your mother monthly. Separate account. Your father can't access it." Eliza set her pen down. She doesn't need to know where it comes from, he said. If that makes things easier. She stared at him. Why? She asked. Because she shouldn't have to depend on him either, he said, as though it were obvious, as though it were the only possible answer. She sat very still. She was thinking about her mother, 30 years of managing Gerald Marlowe's rages, with a patience that looked like compliance, but was really survival. Her mother, who had squeezed her hand at the wedding and looked at her with eyes that said everything she couldn't say out loud. "Thank you," Eliza said. "Eliza." "I know what you said," she interrupted, and he stopped, slightly surprised. "But this deserves thanks, so thank you." He looked at her for a moment. Something moved through his eyes. Not quite a smile, but something in the same family. "You're welcome," he said. She picked up her pen. He stayed. The summer night pressed warm against the windows. Somewhere on the property, a horse called out and was answered. Ruth moved through the back of the house, shutting things down for the night, unhurried and certain. And the sitting room held two people who had both been alone for a very long time. One who had forgotten that he was lonely, and one who had spent so many years afraid that she had forgotten what it felt like not to be. And neither of them spoke about any of that. They didn't have the language for it yet. But the room felt different than it had a week ago. Smaller somehow. Warmer. Like something was beginning to take up space in it. Like something was very quietly beginning. The ledger was a mess. Eliza didn't say so right away. She sat at the desk in the study on her second Monday at Coldwater. The household accounts open in front of her, and she went through the numbers carefully and quietly, the way she did everything, and by the third page, she understood that the previous system had been held together primarily by Ruth's memory and a kind of stubborn optimism that did not translate well to arithmetic. She went and found Nathaniel in the barn. I was checking the shoes on a bay mare crouched down with the horse's foreleg between his knees, speaking to her in the low, patient tone he used for animals and difficult conversations. He looked up when Eliza's shadow crossed the doorway. "The accounts," she said. "What about them?" "They're wrong." He set the horse's foot down carefully and straightened. "How wrong?" "About $40 wrong over the last quarter. Not theft," she added quickly, because she saw something move across his face. "Arithmetic. And some expenses being recorded in the wrong columns. It's fixable." She paused. "I already fixed most of it." He looked at her for a moment. "You've been at it since breakfast," he said. "It needed doing." He came out of the stall and latched it behind him. He was looking at her with that steady, considering look. She was starting to recognize the look that meant he was revising something. "Ruth's going to be embarrassed," he said. "Ruth doesn't need to know I found it," Eliza said. "I'll just show her the new system going forward. She's not careless. She just needed a different method." He was quiet for a moment. "That's thoughtful," he said. "Not flattery, just a man identifying a fact." "It's practical," she said. "Ruth runs this house. I need her to trust me. Embarrassing her doesn't accomplish that." Nathaniel looked at her for a beat longer than usual. "No," he said. "It doesn't." She turned to go back to the house. "Eliza." She stopped. "Good work," he said. It was 2 words. Simple, plain, undecorated. She had received compliments before that were long and elaborate and worth nothing, and she had received 2 plain words from this man and felt them in her chest, like something warm pressing against old cold. She didn't say thank you. She was trying to stop doing that. "I'll have the corrected ledger ready by supper," she said, and walked back to the house. She did not let herself smile until she was through the front door. The trouble started on a Tuesday, the way most trouble did, quietly and without warning. Eliza was in the kitchen with Ruth when she heard the horse come up the drive, hard and fast. The way horses came when someone was riding urgent rather than riding careful. She heard Nathaniel's voice outside, sharp, in a tone she hadn't heard from him yet, the kind of tone that meant something had gone wrong in a way that required immediate management. She stayed in the kitchen. She had learned young that the best thing to do when men were upset was to become very small and very still, and wait for the storm to locate its target. But Ruth had already gone to the window, and Ruth's eyebrows had done something Eliza hadn't seen them do before. What is it? Eliza asked. Crane, Ruth said. Silas Crane. He owns the southern property. He and Nathaniel have been arguing about the boundary line for 2 years. Is it serious? Ruth's expression answered that without words. Eliza set down the bowl she was holding and went to the doorway. She didn't go out. She stood just inside and watched through the screen. There were 2 men in the yard. Nathaniel she knew. The other, Silas Crane, was older, heavy through the middle, with the particular way of standing that men had when they were accustomed to other people moving out of their way. He was red-faced and speaking loudly and jabbing a thick finger at Nathaniel's chest in a way that made Eliza's whole body go rigid with a recognition that had nothing to do with land boundaries. You moved that fence, Crane was saying. 3 feet onto my property. 3 feet, Hayes. I've got men who measured it. Your men measured from the wrong marker, Nathaniel said. His voice was controlled, barely. The survey I had done in March puts the line exactly where it's always been. Your survey. Crane made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Paid for by you, done by a man who works for you. Done by a licensed surveyor from Lexington who has no relationship to me or my property, Nathaniel said. And there was something dangerous under the words now, something that had moved past patience. Which you would know if you'd looked at the documentation I sent you in April. I don't need your documentation. Crane. Nathaniel's voice dropped, got quieter, which Eliza was beginning to understand was more alarming than if he'd gotten louder. You're on my land right now. You rode up hard, and you're making accusations in my yard in front of my workers, and I have been patient with you because we've known each other 15 years, and because I believe in settling things like civilized men. A pause. But I am running low on patience this morning, so I'm going to suggest you go home. Look at the documentation I sent you, and come back when you have something factual to say. Crane stared at him. You think that wife of yours changes things, Crane said, and something in his voice had shifted into something uglier. Think marrying a Marlowe girl makes you more respectable than you already were. Her father's a drunk and a debtor, and everyone in 3 counties knows it. That's what you brought into this house, Hayes. That's your great alliance. The yard went silent. Eliza stood in the doorway and felt the words land, the way. Words like that always landed, not like a surprise because she had heard variations of this her whole life, but like something pressing on a bruise that hadn't healed. Her father's failures had always been hers. She had understood that since she was 12. She waited for Nathaniel to say nothing, to deflect, to separate himself from her the way men separated themselves from inconvenient associations when those associations cost them something. Say that again, Nathaniel said. His voice was very quiet. Crane blinked. I said, I heard you. Nathaniel took 1 step forward. Just 1. I'm giving you the opportunity to reconsider having said it. I only meant, I know what you meant. Nathaniel's voice was flat and certain as stone. My wife is a Hayes. Whatever your opinions are about her family, you'll keep them off my property and out of your mouth when you're standing on it. Are we clear? Crane stared at him. Are we clear, Silas? It wasn't a question. Fine, Crane said finally, with the particular petulance of a man who has been outmaneuvered and knows it. We'll settle the boundary through the county. You'll hear from my attorney. I look forward to it, Nathaniel said. Crane mounted up and rode out hard. The dust settled in the yard. Nathaniel stood with his back to the house for a long moment, and she could see the set of his shoulders, the deliberate way he was pulling himself back from the edge of something. Then he turned and saw her in the doorway. She hadn't meant to be seen. She started to step back. Don't, he said. She stopped. He came to the doorway and stopped in front of her close enough that she could see the tight line around his mouth, the controlled anger still burning behind his eyes. You heard that, he said. Yes. Are you all right? She blinked. Am I? She stopped, rearranged. I'm not the one who just had a man threaten legal action on my property. That's not what I asked. She looked at him. I'm used to it, she said. What he said about my father. I've heard that kind of thing before. I know, Nathaniel said. That doesn't mean it's acceptable. She held his gaze for a moment. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Defend me. It would have been easier to let it go. He looked at her with those river water eyes, and his voice when it came was very level. That is not something I'm willing to let go, he said. She didn't have an answer for that. She didn't have the language for what his certainty felt like inside her chest. The way it pressed against the places that had been compressed and careful for so long, they'd started to feel like just the shape of things. The attorney, she said finally, because practicality was safer ground. Is it serious? Crane doesn't have the case, Nathaniel said. He knows it. This is posturing. He paused. But I'll need the survey records. They're in the locked room off the back hall. She hadn't asked about the locked room. She'd noted it as she noted everything and filed it away. I'll get the key, he said. The locked room was an office. Not a dramatic revelation, just a room with a desk and filing cabinets and walls of paperwork, the working heart of the Coldwater operation. He unlocked it and stood aside and let her in, and she understood that this was not a small thing, even if it looked like one. She found the survey records in the third cabinet. Organized, precise, cross-referenced. She pulled the relevant folder and brought it to the desk, and they went through it together, standing side by side, and she was close enough to him that she could hear him breathing, and she was not afraid. That was the thing she noticed. She was standing close to a man, and she was not calculating exits. It was such a strange thing not to be doing. This is the marker he's contesting, Nathaniel said, pointing to a notation on the survey map. He claims the original boundary stone was moved during the roadwork 2 years ago. Was it? No, but I can't prove that with the survey alone. He frowned at the map. I need a witness, someone who was here before the roadwork. Henry, Eliza said. Nathaniel looked at her. Your foreman, she said. He's been on this property longer than the roadwork. Hasn't he? A pause. 14 years, Nathaniel said. Then Henry saw where the stone was. Nathaniel looked at her for a moment longer. Then he almost smiled, not quite, but closed the same near smile she'd seen in the sitting room. You think like a lawyer, he said. I think like someone who grew up watching her father lose arguments he should have won, she said. You need the right witness in the right room. He nodded slowly. Henry it is. She closed the folder, handed it to him. Their hands didn't quite touch, and she noticed that too, the careful distance he maintained, always the way he was deliberate about space. In a way she was only now understanding was deliberate, rather than indifferent. He was being careful with her. She didn't know what to do with careful. She was learning. The letter arrived on a Thursday, and she knew before she opened it. She knew by the handwriting on the envelope, her name in her father's hand, the G of Eliza pressed too hard into the paper, the way he pressed too hard into everything. She had learned to read his moods through his penmanship since she was 9 years old. He was not pleased. She stood in the front hallway with the letter in both hands, and she thought quite calmly, he found out about Mother's money. Then she thought of course he did. She opened it. She read it once quickly, then again slower. Gerald Marlowe was not a stupid man, which had always been part of the problem. He had, in his methodical way, tracked the new account her mother had access to, and determined its general origin, and he had composed a letter that was careful enough to contain no direct threats. He knew better than that, but that communicated with the precision of long practice exactly what he expected to happen next. He expected the account to stop. He expected Eliza to make that happen. I expected implicit in every line that she understood what would occur if she chose otherwise. She folded the letter, put it in her pocket, went to find Nathaniel. I was in the study going over something with Henry, who looked up when she came in and then looked at her face and said quietly, I'll be in the barn, and left without being asked. That was Henry. She was beginning to like Henry. Eliza, Nathaniel said. He'd already seen her face. He was good at reading faces. She'd learned a skill cultivated in the army. She suspected where reading a man's expression correctly could mean the difference between an orderly retreat and a disaster. She took the letter out of her pocket and put it on the desk in front of him. She stood back and waited while he read it. She watched his face, the jaw muscle, the controlled stillness, the particular quality of his silence. He read it twice the same way she had. He tracked the account, Nathaniel said. Yes. How long do you think he's known? 2 weeks, maybe 3. He's slow and thorough. He likes to gather information before he moves. She paused. He learned that from his creditors. Nathaniel set the letter down. Flat, precise, face down. The gesture of a man setting something aside that he is about to deal with. He won't stop the account, he said. He'll try. He can't, Nathaniel said. Legally. It's in your mother's name now, not his. I structured it specifically so he can't touch it. She absorbed that. You anticipated this. I anticipated he would look, Nathaniel said. I didn't anticipate he'd write to you rather than to me. Something moved across his face. That was his message, that he can still reach you. The word reach landed in her chest like a stone in still water sending out rings. He can always reach me, she said, not afraid, just factual. That's what he wants me to know. That distance doesn't matter. Nathaniel looked at her steadily. Does he know that's not true anymore? She met his eyes. He'll find out, she said. And something in Nathaniel's expression shifted, something that wasn't anger, or at least wasn't only anger, something that was more complicated than that. Like watching a man realize the person across from him was stronger than he'd understood. Not reassessing, recognizing. I'm going to write back, he said. To your father. He'll take that as a provocation. Good, Nathaniel said. Let him provoke. Let him do something loud enough that there's a legal record of it. He picked up a pen. Men like your father rely on silence. They need the woman to say nothing, and the husband to look away. I am not going to look away, Eliza. She stood in the quiet study, and she thought about that. About the particular architecture of her father's power, built entirely on people, not speaking, not pushing back, not making noise. She thought about how many years she had been silent, because silence felt like safety. Write the letter, she said. He wrote it. She sat in the chair across from him and listened to the scratch of the pen, and outside the summer afternoon went long and golden over the Kentucky fields, and she felt something she hadn't felt in such a long time that it took her several minutes to name it. Fury. Not at Nathaniel. Not even primarily at her father, though that was there too, banked and steady as coals. At the years. At the silence. At all the letters she had never written. All the things she had swallowed, all the time she had made herself smaller so that someone else could feel bigger. She was done making herself smaller. She didn't say this out loud. She wasn't ready to say it out loud. But she thought it very clearly sitting in the chair across from her husband, while he wrote a letter to her father that she did not need to craft and did not need to sign, but that was being written because of her, for her on her behalf. She thought it clearly, and she held it like something new. It was the dinner party that broke something open. 3 weeks into the marriage, Nathaniel had an obligation. He couldn't avoid a dinner at the home of Judge Calloway, one of the county's most influential men, a social event that half of Harlan County would attend, and that required the Hayes family to appear as a unit. Eliza had known it was coming. She'd been dressing for public events since she was 15. She was not prepared for the wives. Not all of them. There were women there who were perfectly decent, who shook her hand and asked sensible questions, and treated her with the ordinary courtesy of strangers. But there was a group, 3 of them clustered near the window in the Calloway parlor, who had apparently decided something about Eliza before she'd walked through the door and saw no reason to revise it. The leader was a woman named Cecilia Morton, whose husband owned the largest mill in the county and who wore her social position like armor. She was not subtle. Of course, we all know the Marlowe situation, Cecilia said loudly enough for Eliza and the 2 women flanking her to hear, not looking at Eliza, but angled in her direction. Quite remarkable that Nathaniel moved so quickly. One does wonder what the arrangement actually entailed. One of the flanking women made a small sound that might have been sympathy, or might have been amusement. She seems pleasant enough, the second woman said in the tone people used when they meant the opposite. Though I understand she had very little say in the matter. Do any of us really? Cecilia said and laughed. Eliza stood 6 feet away, holding a glass of lemonade, and felt the old machinery start up, the careful withdrawal, the face going neutral, the practiced art of not reacting. She had done this so many times. She knew how to survive a room that had decided to be unkind. But something was different tonight, and it took her a moment to identify what. Nathaniel was across the room speaking with Judge Calloway, and she could feel his attention without looking at him. Not watching over her, not protective in the suffocating way, not monitoring her, just aware. She could feel that he knew where she was, that he would notice if something went wrong. She had never had that before. She had never had anyone in a room who would notice. Cecilia turned finally and addressed her directly. "Mrs. Hayes, how are you settling into county life?" "Very well, thank you," Eliza said. "And the estate, such a large property to manage suddenly." A smile that did not touch her eyes. Nathaniel's first wife was extraordinary at it, ran everything so smoothly. There it was, the comparison. Designed to diminish, laid in with the precision of someone who had done this before. Eliza looked at her. "I've been working through the household accounts," she said. Her voice came out steady and clear. "There were some errors in the record-keeping from the previous quarter. I've been correcting them." She paused just a beat. "It's detailed work, but I find I'm good at finding things that were missed." Cecilia blinked. The second woman had gone slightly still. "I'm sure you are," Cecilia said, recovering quickly. "Such a practical skill for a woman in your position." "Thank you," Eliza said pleasantly. "I developed it young. When you grow up watching men mismanage money, you learn to count very carefully." The pause that followed was approximately 3 seconds. Then Nathaniel was beside her. She hadn't heard him move. He was simply there, his hand settling light and brief at the small of her back, and she did not flinch, which surprised her. "Cecilia," he said. His voice was perfectly cordial, perfectly controlled. "Your husband was looking for you. Something about the Calloway's wine cellar recommendations." It was a dismissal wrapped in courtesy, and Cecilia knew it, and there was nothing she could do about it in the middle of a party where she needed to appear gracious. "Of course," she said, and moved away. The third woman followed without a word. Nathaniel stood beside Eliza for a moment after they'd gone. "You didn't need that," Eliza said quietly. "I had it." "I know you did," he said, and something in the way he said it made her look up at him. "I was watching Cecilia's retreating back with the expression of a man filing information for later use. That's not why I came over." "Then why?" He looked down at her. "Because you've been standing alone on this side of the room for 20 minutes, and I should have come sooner." She absorbed that. "I'm not fragile," she said. "I know that too," he said. "Can I bring you something from the table?" She thought about it. "The cornbread," she said. "If they have any." He almost smiled, the corner of his mouth just barely. "I'll check," he said. He went. She watched him cross the room, and she felt the women watching her watch him, and she held herself straight and still and let them look. She was a Hayes. This was her county now. And she was beginning to understand slowly, with the careful precision she applied to everything, that she was not as alone in it as she'd thought. The real break happened the night Nathaniel came home with a cut on his face and wouldn't explain it. He came through the back door at 9 at night, later than usual, and Eliza was still in the study, going over the week's accounts, when she heard him and came to the doorway and saw the state of him. Not badly hurt, a cut along his jaw, dried blood at the temple, dust on everything. "What happened?" she asked. "Crane's men," he said, going to the washstand in the kitchen. "On the road back from Henderson's property, 3 of them." She crossed to him before she'd made a decision to do it. "Sit down," she said. "I'm fine." "You're bleeding on Ruth's clean floor," she said. "Sit down." He sat. She got water and a cloth, and she cleaned the cut on his jaw, and he let her, sitting still with the particular stillness of a man who was not accustomed to being tended and didn't know what to do with his hands. She could feel the tension in him, not from the injuries, she didn't think. From something else. From the specific tightness of a man who had been in a fight and won it, and was now sitting in his kitchen, letting his wife clean blood off his face, and the gap between those two things was very wide. "How many of them?" she asked, keeping her voice level, her hand steady. 3, he said again. "I'm fine." "You said that." "It's true." She pressed the cloth gently against the cut, and felt him not react, which told her the cut was surface rather than deep. "Did you start it?" "No." "Did you finish it?" The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. "Yes." She worked for a moment in silence. "Crane sent them," she said. Not a question. "Most likely. I can't prove it." "Can you prove anything that ties Crane to this?" "Not yet." "But you're going to try?" "Yes." She pressed the cloth once more, then set it down. She stood close enough to him that she could see the lines at the corners of his eyes, the gray coming in at his temples, the particular way, exhaustion, and something else, something that was not tiredness, sat in his face. "You could let the boundary dispute go," she said quietly. "Would it cost you so much 3 feet of fence line?" He looked up at her. "It's not about the fence," he said. "I know," she said. "It's about whether he can push you." "He can't," Nathaniel said. Simply. Finally. She looked at him for a moment. "No," she said. "I don't think he can." And something shifted in the room. Not dramatic, not announced. Just a quiet rearrangement of the air between them. The specific warmth that comes from two people standing on the same side of something for the first time, and both recognizing it. Eliza stepped back, picked up the cloth, folded it. "Are you hungry?" she asked. "Starving," he said. "I'll tell Ruth." She started for the door. "Eliza." She stopped. "Thank you," he said. Quiet and direct the way he said everything that mattered. She stood in the doorway for a moment. "Don't thank me for ordinary things," she said. She heard him exhale not a laugh, but something adjacent to one. She went to find Ruth, and behind her in this kitchen. Nathaniel Hayes sat with a cleaned cut and damp hands, and the specific unfamiliar sensation of a man realizing that something had changed in his house, in his life, in the long, careful calculation of what he was willing to want. He had not planned for this. He was not sure anymore that he minded. The county hearing was set for the 3rd week of August. Nathaniel had known it was coming. He'd filed the documentation, engaged the attorney, arranged for Henry to give testimony about the boundary marker. It was by any legal standard a straightforward case. The survey was clean. The witness was credible. Crane didn't have a real argument, only a loud one. What Nathaniel hadn't anticipated was Gerald Marlowe riding into Harlan County 4 days before the hearing. Eliza found out the way. She found out most things that were meant to be kept from her by accident and too late to prepare. She was coming down the back stairs when she heard Nathaniel's voice in the front hall, low and controlled in the way that meant he was managing something serious. And then she heard a second voice, and her body knew it before her mind caught up. She stopped on the stairs. Her hand found the wall. Her father's voice. Right there. In this house. In the house she had started slowly and carefully to think of as safe. "I have a right to speak with my daughter," Gerald Marlowe was saying. He had a voice like expensive furniture polished on the surface, heavy underneath. "Whatever arrangement you've made doesn't change that." "You're not in Virginia," Nathaniel said. "You don't have rights on my property that I haven't extended to you." "She's my daughter. She's my wife," Nathaniel said. And the flatness of it, the absolute without discussion certainty of it, hit Eliza somewhere in the sternum. Those are not the same category of relationship. A pause. "I only want to speak with her," her father said, shifting to the reasonable tone, the one Eliza knew best, the one he used when the direct approach hadn't worked. "Surely you're not going to keep a man from his own child." "I'm not keeping anyone from anything," Nathaniel said. "I'm telling you that if she wants to speak with you, that's her choice. And if she doesn't, you'll leave." Eliza stood on the staircase and made a decision. She came down the rest of the stairs and walked into the front hall and looked at her father for the first time in 2 months. Gerald Marlowe was 56 years old and looked like a man who had borrowed against everything he owned, including his face. He was still handsome in a way that had probably served him once, with silver hair and the kind of posture that came from old money and older habits. He looked at her, and his expression did something complicated, relief, calculation, and something that might have been genuine feeling, though she had long ago stopped being able to tell the genuine from the performed. "Eliza," he said. "Father," she said. Nothing in her voice. His eyes moved to her, quickly reading her, assessing the same way he always had. Then they moved to Nathaniel, standing 3 feet to her right, and then back to her. "I'd like a word," he said. "Privately." "No," she said. He blinked. She had never said no to him like that before. Not flat, not apologetic, not followed immediately by a softening. Just no, complete and unadorned. "Eliza, whatever you need to say to me, you can say in front of Nathaniel," she said. "Or you can say nothing at all and go back to Virginia. Those are the options." The silence that followed was the kind she knew well. The silence before the weather changed, before his face did the thing it did. She felt her body brace old instinct, and then she felt Nathaniel shift slightly, not moving, not doing anything visible, but present in the way a solid wall was present. Just there. She kept her eyes on her father. "Fine," Gerald said, and his voice had gone careful. He was recalibrating. She knew this too. "I came because I'm concerned about your mother." "My mother is fine," Eliza said. "I've spoken with her." "The money is hers," Eliza said. "It's in her name. It came from my husband. It's not something you have any standing to discuss." Gerald's jaw tightened. "I'm her husband. What concerns her concerns me." "You've been her husband for 30 years, Eliza said, and her voice came out steady and clear, and completely without the tremor she'd expected. "And in 30 years what concerned her has never concerned you, unless it concerned your wallet. So don't use her as a reason for being here. Tell me the real one." The hall went very quiet. Gerald looked at her as if seeing someone he didn't recognize standing in his daughter's body. She didn't look away. "The hearing," he said finally. "On Thursday." She frowned. "What about it?" "Crane," her father said. "Silas Crane came to see me last month, in Virginia." Eliza felt the floor shift slightly under her understanding of things. Nathaniel had gone absolutely still beside her. "He came to Virginia," Nathaniel said. His voice was very quiet. "He made me an offer," Gerald said, looking at Nathaniel now rather than Eliza. At least he had the sense to look uncomfortable. "He said if I would testify that the boundary survey was conducted improperly, that the surveyor had a prior relationship with you, he would settle a portion of my debts." The words landed in the room like stones into water. Eliza turned and looked at Nathaniel. His face was controlled. The jaw muscle was working. His eyes were steady. "And?" Nathaniel said. "And I told him no," Gerald said. Another silence. "Why?" Eliza asked, because she needed to know, because her father did not say no to money ever, unless there was a better calculation available. Gerald looked at her, and for just a moment, his face did something she hadn't seen it do in a very long time. Something that looked like shame. "Because it would have required me to come here and lie in a county proceeding," he said. "And because," he stopped, started again. "Because Crane told me what he intended to do with the Hayes property once he had it. He intends to buy out your husband's remaining creditors and force a sale." "I don't have remaining creditors," Nathaniel said. "You do," Gerald said. "I'm sorry. You have a note with a bank in Louisville that Crane purchased last week. He's been planning this for some time. The boundary dispute was the opening move, not the end of it." The room was completely silent. Eliza watched Nathaniel process this. She watched the calculations move behind his eyes, the reordering of things, the specific quality of a man discovering that the ground he'd been standing on was larger and more dangerous than he'd known. "You came here to tell us this," Eliza said to her father. "Not quite a question. I came here to—" Gerald stopped, looked at her. His voice when it came was quieter than she'd ever heard it. "I came here because Crane threatened to tell me things about your husband that weren't true, and when I didn't agree to his terms, he suggested he had other ways to pressure me. And I realized—" He stopped again, and the pause was long enough that she could see him working for words he didn't usually need. "I realized that I had made enough decisions in my life that served my interests and not yours, and that this one I could do differently." Eliza looked at her father. She wanted to believe him. She was aware, with the precise clarity of a woman who had learned to examine her own wanting, that she wanted to believe him, because she had always wanted him to be something other than what he was. That wanting was old and persistent, and not particularly trustworthy. But he was here. Whatever his reasons, he was here. "Thank you for coming," she said. "You should go back to Virginia." He looked startled. "Eliza, there's nothing more you can do here," she said. "And I don't want you in this county during the hearing. It would complicate things." She paused. "I'll write to Mother. I'll tell her you came." He stood there for a moment, holding his hat, looking at her with those eyes that were still her father's eyes under everything else. "You've changed," he said. "Yes," she said. "I have." He nodded once, looked at Nathaniel. Some exchange happened between them that was silent and male, and that she only partially understood. Then he left. She stood in the front hall and listened to his horse move down the drive, and she felt Nathaniel watching her. "Are you all right?" he asked. "No," she said honestly, because she had started trying to be honest about that. "Okay," he said. "Not pushing, not fixing, just receiving it." She turned and looked at him. "The note in Louisville, the one Crane purchased." "I know about it," he said. "I've known for 2 weeks. I was managing it." "Alone," she said. "Yes." She held that. "Don't do that," she said. "Don't manage things alone that affect both of us. I need to know what's happening. I can't—" She stopped. "I spent my whole life being the last person to find out things that were about me. I won't do that here." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're right," he said. "Just that, no qualification." "Tell me about the note," she said. He told her. They worked through the night. This was not a thing she had expected from her marriage, sitting across from her husband at the desk in the study at midnight, with documents spread between them, going through the financial architecture of Crane's plan piece by piece, finding its weak points. But Nathaniel had pulled out everything relevant, and Eliza had started reading, and 4 hours passed without either of them noticing. She was good at this. She had always been good at numbers and patterns, and the way money moved beneath the surface of things. Her father had wasted that. Nathaniel didn't even blink. "Here," she said at approximately 1 a.m, pressing her finger to a page. The note was sold at a discount. Crane paid less than face value for it, which means the original lender was willing to take a loss to liquidate quickly. She looked up. Why would a bank take a loss on a note? Nathaniel frowned at the page. Unless they needed the liquidity. Or unless someone pressured them to sell. He looked at her. "Who owns that bank?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Calloway." "Judge Calloway," she said. "The one whose dinner party we attended." "Yes." "Who is also the judge assigned to the boundary hearing." The silence stretched between them. "He's compromised," Eliza said. "I can't prove that," Nathaniel said. "Not yet," she said. "But if Calloway pressured the bank to sell the note to Crane, there's a transaction record. Banks keep records." She looked at him. "Do you have anyone in Louisville? Someone you trust?" He thought for a moment. "My attorney, James Whitmore. Have him pull the transaction records for that note. All of them. The sale date, the discount percentage, any communications." She paused. "And I want to know who else Crane has approached. If he went to my father, he went to others. Men who had something to lose and something to gain." Nathaniel looked at her across the desk in the middle of the night, with the candles burning low and papers spread between them, and his expression did the thing it sometimes did, the thing that was not quite a smile, but that lived in the same country. "When you said you could read a ledger," he said. "I told you I wasn't helpless," she said. "You did," he said. "I didn't fully understand what you meant." She met his eyes. "Most people don't," she said. The hearing was a disaster from the moment it started. Not for the reasons Eliza had expected. She had prepared for Crane's attorney to be aggressive for the challenge to the survey, for the procedural maneuvering she'd watched her father lose to a dozen times. She was prepared for all of that. She was not prepared for Crane to walk in with a witness she hadn't known about. The man's name was Aldous Price. He was small and dry and precise, and he claimed to be an independent surveyor who had conducted his own assessment of the boundary line in June, and who had reached a different conclusion than Nathaniel's surveyor. Eliza sat in the gallery beside Ruth and watched Nathaniel's attorney work through the cross-examination, and she watched Price's answers, and something nagged at her. Something in the precision of his testimony. The way it was almost too clean. The way he answered every question at the same measured pace, as if he had rehearsed not just the answers, but the pauses between them. She leaned to Ruth. "Do you know that man?" Ruth studied Price. "No," she said. "But I know his type." "What type?" "The type that's been told exactly what to say, and is concentrating very hard on remembering it." Eliza looked at Price. At his hands folded precisely in his lap. At the slight tension around his eyes every time Nathaniel's attorney asked something unexpected. She pulled the small notebook she'd started carrying from her pocket. Wrote a name. Passed it to Nathaniel's attorney when he came back to his table. He looked at it. Frowned. Leaned over, and she said very quietly, "Ask him where he boarded in Harlan County during his survey in June." The attorney looked at her for a moment. Then he turned back to Price. "Mr. Price," he said, "when you conducted your independent survey in June, where were you staying?" Price blinked. It was a small blink, barely perceptible. "At the county inn." "And the county inn in June," the attorney said, consulting nothing, because he was making this up in the moment, "would have records of your stay." "Yes, of course." "And the equipment you used for the survey, you brought it from Lexington," Price said. "And you traveled to Lexington for this assignment, at whose request?" The pause was 3 seconds, which was 2 seconds too long. "I was engaged independently," Price said. "By whom?" "I prefer not to." "Mr. Price." Judge Calloway from the bench. "You'll answer the question." Another pause. Eliza watched Silas Crane sitting at his table across the room. Watched his jaw go tight. "I was referred by an associate," Price said carefully. "A business associate." "Could you name this associate?" I received a letter. I don't recall the name precisely." "You don't recall the name of the person who hired you?" "I was paid in advance, by bank draft." "From which bank?" The courtroom had gone very quiet. Eliza leaned forward slightly. "The Louisville Commercial Bank," Price said. Nathaniel's attorney turned and looked at Eliza for exactly 1 second. She gave him the smallest nod. He turned back to the room. "Your Honor," he said, "I'd like to request a continuance. I believe we've identified a material connection between the opposing witness and a financial institution with a documented interest in this property dispute, and I want time to subpoena the relevant transaction records." Calloway's face had done something interesting. He was a composed man, a judicial man, a man who had spent decades revealing nothing from the bench. But Eliza was watching very carefully, and she saw it, the flicker there and gone of a man calculating how much trouble had just arrived in his courtroom. "Granted," Calloway said. 2 weeks. Crane was on his feet. "Your Honor." "Sit down, Mr. Crane," Calloway said, and his voice was level enough to cover everything underneath it. Crane sat. The gavel came down. In the gallery, Ruth exhaled. Eliza wrote 2 words in her notebook: Louisville. Monday. Nathaniel found her outside the courthouse in the summer heat. She was standing in the shade of an oak tree, notebook in hand, going through what she'd written, because she needed to think, and thinking required stillness, and she'd been anything but still for the last 2 hours. He came and stood beside her. "You knew about Price," he said. "I suspected something was wrong with him," she said. "I didn't know the details until he said Louisville." "How did you know to ask about where he was boarding?" "Because men who are lying borrow the details they need and invent the ones they don't," she said. He had borrowed his testimony. It was too smooth, but he hadn't invented his accommodations. When people lie about big things, they forget to lie about small things. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "My father did the same thing," she said, not looking up from her notebook. "When he was managing his creditors, I got very good at watching the seams." He said nothing, but she felt him absorb, that felt him understanding something about her, about the way her history had built her, about what living inside her father's house had cost her, and what it had incidentally given her. "Calloway is involved," Nathaniel said. Yes. That's a problem. It's also leverage, she said. He knows we know, which means he can't rule against you without it looking like confirmation. She closed her notebook. He's going to step back from this case. Watch. He can't recuse himself without explanation. He'll find one, she said. Men like Calloway are very good at finding explanations. Nathaniel looked at her. What do you want to do on Monday? He said. Not what should I do. Not I'll go to Louisville. What do you want to do? She looked up. I want to come with you, she said. To see Whitmore. I want to see the records myself. He didn't hesitate. All right, he said. She nodded, looked back at her notebook, and then without fully deciding to, she said, My father. What he said about why he came. Do you believe him? Nathaniel considered it. I believe he told us the truth about Crane, he said. About why he told us, I think he told you the part of the truth that showed him best. A pause. That's not nothing. It's also not everything. She thought about that. No, she said, but I'll take it. She looked out across the square at the people moving through their ordinary summer day, at the courthouse behind them, with its contained disaster, at the long blue sky over Kentucky. And she felt something she hadn't expected to feel, standing outside a county hearing, where her husband's property had nearly been taken by a man who had gone to her father first. She felt useful, not useful, in the way she'd always been useful, manageable, compliant, a problem solved by being removed from one ledger and entered into another. Useful in the way that meant something she had built herself had just mattered, had just changed something, had just been the difference. She was still holding the notebook. Nathaniel was still standing beside her. Eliza, he said. You changed the outcome of that hearing. We haven't won anything yet, she said. No, he said. But we would have lost today without what you saw. He paused. I need you to know that I know that. She looked at him. She had spent 23 years being invisible in rooms where decisions were being made about her. And here was a man telling her plain direct, the way he said everything, that she had been visible, that she had mattered, that the thing she'd done had been seen and named and given its proper weight. She looked at him for a long moment. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me for ordinary things, she said. I know, but this isn't ordinary. He held her gaze. No, he said. It isn't. They stood in the summer heat outside the Harlan County Courthouse, and neither of them said what was becoming increasingly obvious to both of them, because they were both careful people who had been hurt by carelessness and had learned to move slowly toward things that mattered. But it was there. It had been building for weeks in the kitchen and the study and the sitting room, in the ledger corrections and the dinner party and the midnight documents, and it was there now, standing in the space between them in the August heat, waiting for them to stop being afraid of it. She looked away first. We should get back, she said. I want to write to Whitmore before supper. I'll drive, he said. They walked to the carriage. He helped her up, his hand at her elbow, and she led him, and neither of them made anything of it, but she felt the warmth of his hand through her sleeve for the whole drive home. It was 3 days before the Louisville trip that everything came apart. She woke at 2 in the morning to the sound of horses, more than one, moving fast up the Coldwater Drive, and she was at the window before she was fully awake. Old training, and she saw the torches, and her stomach dropped. She was dressed and down the stairs before the knock came. Nathaniel was already in the front hall in shirt sleeves, with the look on his face she'd seen once before. The controlled danger of a man who had commanded cavalry and was deciding how much of that to bring into the room. The man at the door was a deputy sheriff named Greer, who had the grace to look uncomfortable about what he was doing. Behind him in the yard, 2 other men. And behind them, at the edge of the torchlight, sitting his horse like a man who had purchased the right to be there, Silas Crane. Mr. Hayes, Greer said, I have a warrant for the seizure of certain financial documents related to the Louisville commercial bank note issued under the authority of Judge Calloway, Nathaniel said. Greer's jaw worked. Yes, sir. Step inside, Nathaniel said. Eliza came forward. Greer looked at her, then back at Nathaniel, uncertain which of them he was supposed to be dealing with. "The warrant," Eliza said. "May I see it?" Greer handed it to her. She read it quickly, and then again more slowly. "This warrant is signed by Calloway," she said, keeping her voice even. "Calloway, who is the sitting judge on the Hayes-Crane boundary case." "Yes, ma'am." "That's a conflict of interest," she said. "A judge cannot issue warrants in cases before his own court that serve the opposing party's interest." Greer blinked. "I'm not a lawyer," he said. "No," she said. "But your sheriff is, and he knows the law. And when he sees this warrant in the morning, he's going to have questions for Calloway that Calloway is not going to want to answer." She handed the warrant back to Greer. "So I'm going to suggest that you think very carefully about whether you want your name on the execution of a compromised warrant at 2 in the morning." The deputy looked at the warrant, looked at Crane in the yard, looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel said nothing. He didn't need to. He had the quality when he chose to deploy it of a man who had seen worse than this and was entirely prepared to wait. "I'll need to consult with the sheriff," Greer said finally. "You do that," Eliza said. Greer left. Crane did not leave immediately. He sat his horse at the edge of the torchlight for a long moment, and Eliza could feel his eyes on her even at the distance, calculating and cold. Then he turned his horse and rode out. She stood in the front doorway and watched him go. Behind her, Nathaniel was very still. "Eliza," he said. She turned. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not the near smile, not the controlled anger, not the careful, deliberate patience he used when he was being thoughtful. Something open. Something that had let its guard down. That was... He stopped. "Legal," she said. "Yes," he said. It was. She looked at him. "Are you all right?" she asked, because she'd learned to ask it back now, to return the question he'd always given her. "I don't know," he said honestly. She nodded. "Come inside," she said. "I'll put water on." He came inside, and in the kitchen, at 2 in the morning, while the summer dark pressed against the windows and Kentucky went on being vast and indifferent. Outside, Eliza Hayes put water on the stove, and her husband sat at the kitchen table and looked at her with the expression of a man who had been alone for 4 years and had just understood with a sudden and total clarity that he was not alone anymore. He didn't say it. She didn't say it either. But in the quiet between them, in the ordinary miracle of two people who had both been broken sitting together in a kitchen at 2 in the morning, something was said anyway. And both of them heard it. The water boiled, and neither of them moved to take it off the stove for a full minute. Eliza stood with her back to it and her arms crossed, not defensively. She'd been working on that, the way she crossed her arms whenever she felt exposed. But because the kitchen was cool at 2 in the morning, and she was still in her light summer dress, and her heart was still moving faster than she wanted it to, Nathaniel was at the table. He'd put his face in his hands somewhere in the last 30 seconds, not dramatically, just quietly, the way a man did when he'd held something together long enough and the room was finally safe enough to put it down. She took the kettle off herself, found 2 cups, didn't ask if he wanted any, just poured. She set one in front of him and sat down across from him with the other. He looked up. His face in the low light of the kitchen was tired in a way she hadn't seen it before. Not the physical tired of long days in the field. Something older than that. "He's not going to stop," Nathaniel said. "No," she agreed. "He's not. The warrant will be invalidated. Calloway knows it. Crane knows it." He wrapped both hands around the cup. "But there will be something else. There's always something else with men like him." "Yes," she said. "There is." He looked at her. "Does that frighten you?" She thought about it honestly, the way she'd been trying to think about things since she'd arrived at Coldwater, without the automatic reassurance, without the reflexive, "I'm fine." 6 weeks ago it would have, she said. Now, she paused. Now it makes me angry. Which feels better? Something moved through his eyes. "Anger is better," he agreed. "My father ruled by making people afraid," she said. "That's the whole mechanism. Fear makes you small. Small people don't fight back." She turned the cup in her hands. Crane operates the same way. The late-night warrant, the hired witness going to my father first, it's all designed to make you feel surrounded, like there's no ground left to stand on. And we have ground, she said. We have the survey we have. Henry, we have Price's connection to the Louisville bank. We have Calloway's conflict of interest now on record. She met his eyes. He came at night because he's running out of daylight moves. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly the tension in his face shifted. Not gone, but organized differently. The way a man looked when he remembered where his footing was. "You're right," he said. "I know," she said, and he almost laughed, not quite, but close enough that she felt it warm the room. They sat in the kitchen at 2 in the morning and drank their tea, and outside the summer dark was thick and close, and Kentucky went on breathing around them, and neither of them spoke for a while, and the silence was entirely different from the silence in the carriage that first day. That silence had been the silence of two strangers performing proximity. This one was something else entirely. This one was comfortable. The realization came to her gently without drama. She was sitting in her kitchen at 2 in the morning after a deputy sheriff had come to her door, and she was comfortable. Not safe in the fragile provisional way she'd been telling herself she was, but genuinely, deeply, unreservedly comfortable. In this room. With this man. She didn't say it. But she felt it settle into her bones like warmth, and she let it. The sheriff came at 9 the next morning. Not with another warrant, with questions. His name was Aldridge, a large, deliberate man with 20 years of county law behind him, and the specific expression of someone who had been handed a problem before his first cup of coffee and was not pleased about it. He sat across from Nathaniel at the dining room table. Eliza sat beside Nathaniel, and if Aldridge had opinions about a woman being present for this conversation, he kept them behind his teeth. "Greer came to me at 4 this morning," Aldridge said. "Told me what happened, showed me the warrant." He set his hat on the table. "I want to know what you know about Calloway's relationship with Silas Crane." "That's a significant question from a county sheriff," Nathaniel said. "It's a significant situation," Aldridge said flatly. "Calloway's been on that bench for 14 years. I don't take anything against him lightly. But a sitting judge issuing warrants in active cases before his own court at midnight that served the opposing party." He shook his head. "That's not something I can look past." "The Louisville bank," Eliza said. Aldridge looked at her. "Calloway has a controlling interest in the Louisville Commercial Bank," she said. "Crane purchased a note from that bank last month at a significant discount. We believe the sale was arranged specifically to give Crane a financial hold over this property." She paused. "We're going to Louisville on Monday to pull the transaction records." Aldridge looked at her steadily. "You've been busy, Mrs. Hayes." "We have," she said. He turned back to Nathaniel. "If you get those records, we'll bring them to you first," Nathaniel said. "Before the attorney, before anyone else." Aldridge picked up his hat. "I'd appreciate that." He stood. "For what it's worth, and I know it's not worth much before this is settled, I've known Nathaniel Hayes for 8 years. He's not a man who starts fights." He looked at Eliza when he said it, like he was saying it to her specifically. "He does finish them, though." She held his gaze. "So do I," she said. He nodded once, and left. Nathaniel watched the door close behind him. "He's going to look into Calloway himself," he said. "That's what he came for," Eliza said. "He needed to know if we had enough to justify it. Now he does." Nathaniel turned to look at her. "How do you read people this quickly?" "I grew up in a house where reading people wrong had consequences," she said simply. He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said. She looked at him. "For what?" "For the house you grew up in," he said. "I know that's not—" He stopped, started again. "I know I can't do anything about what already happened, but I'm sorry it happened." She sat with that. She had received apologies before. Formal ones, useful ones, apologies that were actually requests for forgiveness delivered to make the apologizer feel better rather than the apologized to. She had learned to file them in the category of words that cost nothing. But this was Nathaniel, who did not say things that cost nothing. who measured his words the way he measured everything carefully precisely because he intended them to mean what he said. "Thank you," she said. And this time, he didn't tell her not to thank him. They went to Louisville on Monday. The carriage ride was 6 hours, which was the longest they had been in continuous close proximity since the wedding, and Eliza had half expected it to be strange. It wasn't. They talked for 2 hours about the case, about what they expected to find, about the strategy if the records were incomplete. Then, Nathaniel fell asleep in the way of a man who worked before dawn every day and could sleep anywhere upright, arms crossed, hat over his eyes, and Eliza read for an hour and then put her book down and looked at him. He slept without flinching. Without the watchful quality she'd noticed in herself, the way she never fully went under, always some part of her monitoring the room. He slept like a man who in his own space had nothing to fear. She envied that. She wanted it for herself. She was beginning to think she might actually get there. James Whitmore, Nathaniel's attorney in Louisville, was a small, precise man with an excellent memory and a talent for finding things in filing systems that were not designed to be found in. He met them at his office with 3 months of transaction records from the Louisville Commercial Bank obtained through a legal request he'd submitted the week prior on Nathaniel's behalf. "Page 47, he said, before they'd even fully sat down. Eliza found it first. The note transfer. The discount, 32% below face value, which was extraordinary. The date. And the authorization signature. "Calloway," Nathaniel said, looking over her shoulder. "He didn't just know about the sale," Eliza said. "He authorized it. He's a controlling partner in the bank. This transfer couldn't have happened without his signature." She looked at Whitmore. "Is this actionable?" "Against Crane, absolutely," Whitmore said. "Against Calloway." He hesitated. "It's complicated. He's a judge. The bar for misconduct charges is—" "I don't need him charged," Eliza said. "I need him to recuse himself from the hearing and to have no further involvement in anything touching this property. If this record goes to the State Bar and the Judicial Oversight Board—" "He'll recuse before it gets that far," Whitmore said. "That's what I thought," she said. Nathaniel looked at her sideways. She looked back at him. "I told you," she said quietly. "You did," he said. There was something in his eyes that she'd been seeing more frequently in the last week. Something that she was finally allowing herself to name, because naming things was the first step to choosing them, and she was starting to want to choose this. She looked back at the records. "I want copies of everything," she said. 2 sets. One for Aldridge, one for the Oversight Board. "I'll have them by morning," Whitmore said. "Thank you," she said. "We'll stay in Louisville tonight and ride back tomorrow." Whitmore looked at Nathaniel. "Your wife is formidable," he said in the tone of a man updating his understanding of a situation. "Yes," Nathaniel said. "She is." He said it the way he said everything that was simply true. They stayed at a boarding house that night, 2 rooms, and she sat up late going through her notes because sleep wasn't coming anyway, and she heard him moving in the room next door. Not restlessly, just the sounds of a man settling in for the night boots coming off the creak of a chair. She knocked on the wall between them. It was an absurd thing to do. She knew it was absurd. But she wasn't sure what she wanted. Contact. Acknowledgement. Something. A pause. Then he knocked back. 2 knocks measured and quiet. The same knock he'd used at her room that first night. She pressed her palm flat against the wall for a moment. Then she went back to her notes. But she was smiling, which she didn't realize until she caught herself in the small mirror above the washstand. And then she sat with that for a while, the simple, uncomplicated fact of smiling in a room alone, not performing it for anyone, not deploying it as a tool. Just smiling, because she felt like it. They rode back the next morning, and the records went to Aldridge by afternoon, and the day after that, Calloway sent a letter to the court stating that he was recusing himself from the Hayes Crane matter due to a newly identified conflict of interest, and the replacement judge assigned to the case was a man named Ferris from the next county who had no connection to anyone involved. The hearing was rescheduled for the first week of September. But in the 2 weeks between, something else happened. Something quieter, and in its own way, larger. The house changed. Not physically. The rooms were the same rooms, the furniture, the same furniture, the oak trees outside the same oak trees Margaret had loved. But the quality of the house changed the way the quality of a song changes when someone who knows how to listen finally hears it properly. Eliza stopped asking permission for things. Not dramatically, she hadn't been dramatic about most things since she arrived. But the small hesitations went away. She stopped pausing at the door to the study, stopped waiting to be invited to the accounts desk, stopped eating whatever was served, rather than asking Ruth for what she actually wanted. She asked for things. It still felt strange sometimes. The asking. Like a muscle that had been kept still so long it trembled when she used it. But she used it anyway, and nothing collapsed, and no one punished her for wanting, and slowly the trembling was becoming steadiness. Nathaniel noticed. He didn't comment directly because that wasn't how he was built, but she saw him notice in the way he'd pull a second chair to the desk without being asked, in the way he started leaving the study door open after dinner, so she could come and go as she pleased, in the way he started finding reasons to be in whatever room she was in, not hovering, not monitoring, just present. She noticed that too. They were doing a great deal of noticing. One evening in late August, Nathaniel came in from the field at sunset and found her on the back porch with a cup of tea and Ruth's cat in her lap, which was apparently unprecedented, because Ruth appeared in the kitchen doorway behind Eliza with the expression of a woman witnessing a minor miracle. "That cat hates everyone," Nathaniel said, sitting down beside her. "He doesn't hate me," Eliza said. "He hated Margaret," Ruth said from the doorway. "Come to think of it, he hated me for the first 2 years." "Animals know," Eliza said, and stroked the cat's head, and the cat made a sound like distant thunder and pressed against her hand. Nathaniel looked at her. The sunset was doing something to the light, and she was aware of it without looking at him, aware of his awareness of her. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes. When you were going through those bank records, at Whitmore's office." He paused. "How did you know where to look? You went straight to page 47. She thought about it. "The discount percentage," she said. "In my experience, when a significant financial asset is transferred at a large discount, either the seller needs the money urgently, or someone told them to do it. I was looking for the authorization on an unusual transaction." She glanced at him. "My father lost money the same way. Bad sales at bad prices because someone pressured him." She paused. "I learned to see it." "Your father taught you in a way," Nathaniel said. "Everything he did wrong taught me something," she said. "That was the only return on the investment." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I want to ask you something else." "All right." "Are you—" He stopped, started again. "Are you unhappy here?" She looked at him. "I'm asking directly," he said. "Because I want to know the actual answer, not the one that's appropriate." She held his gaze for a moment. "No," she said. "I'm not unhappy here." "Okay," he said. She said, because he'd asked for the actual answer. "The first few days. Not because of you. Because of myself. Because I didn't know how to be in a place where nothing bad was happening and not wait for it to start." He nodded slowly. "And now?" he asked. She looked at the cat in her lap, at the Kentucky evening spreading out around them, warm and gold and real. "Now I'm starting to believe in the good hours," she said. "That's new for me." The silence between them was warm. "It's new for me too," he said quietly. "Believing in them." She looked at him, and there it was, what she'd been seeing in his face for weeks. What she'd been carefully not naming, because naming it meant choosing it, and choosing it meant trusting it, and trusting it was the most terrifying thing she had ever tried to do. She reached over and put her hand over his where it rested on the arm of the chair. Not reaching toward him, not asking for anything. Just there. Her hand on his. He turned his hand over and held hers. Neither of them spoke. The cat purred. Ruth disappeared from the doorway with the tact of a woman who had survived 11 years in this house by knowing when to be invisible. It was the letter from her mother that broke Eliza open in a way nothing else had managed to. It arrived on a Thursday morning, and she read it in the study with the door open, which she'd have never done before. She'd have taken it to her room, read it privately, processed it alone. But she was here, and she read it here. Her mother wrote the way she'd always written, careful, composed words, chosen to carry more than they appeared to on the surface. She wrote about the garden, about the Virginia summer, about a neighbor's new baby. She wrote that she had received the monthly funds, and that she was well, and that she wanted Eliza to know something. Your father came home from Kentucky. Different, she wrote. I don't know what happened there. I don't know what you said to him, or what you didn't say. But he has been quieter since. He has not a pause in the handwriting, a slight shakiness that only someone who knew her mother's hand would catch. He has not raised his voice in 6 weeks. I don't know what that means yet. I am not sure I trust it. But I wanted you to know. I am sorry, her mother wrote. I have wanted to say that for a long time. I am sorry I did not find a way to stop what happened to you. I told myself I was protecting you by keeping things calm. I understand now that I was protecting myself. That is not something I can excuse. I can only tell you that I see it, and I am sorry, and I love you, and I hope that wherever you are not afraid anymore. Eliza put the letter down. She stared at the desk for a full minute. Then she put her face in her hands and cried properly, fully, without trying to stop it, or manage it, or make it quiet. And she was alone in the study, so there was no one to see it, which was the only reason she could do it at all. She cried for the 6 weeks at Coldwater, and for the 23 years before them. She cried for her mother's careful handwriting, and her 6 weeks of quiet, and the 1,000 small violences that had made silence feel like safety. She cried because she was not afraid anymore, and she hadn't known until she read it how desperately she'd needed someone who loved her to see that. She didn't hear Nathaniel come in. She only knew he was there when she heard the chair scrape. Not her chair, the one across the desk, and she looked up, not even with embarrassment, just wet-faced and undone. And he was sitting across from her with his elbows on the desk, not reaching for her, not trying to fix it, just there. Present. The way he always was. My mother wrote, she said. Her voice came out wrecked, and she didn't try to smooth it. She said she was sorry. He nodded. I've been waiting for that for a long time, she said. I didn't know I was waiting for it. I know, he said. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. I'm sorry. Don't apologize, he said. Quiet and absolute. She looked at him. He was looking back at her with those steady gray eyes, and his face was open in the way it had been the night with the deputy, the openness she'd seen him allow in increments, the dropping of the guard he'd built in 4 years of grief and solitude. I haven't cried since Margaret died, he said. After. Not at the funeral, not after. I just didn't. He looked at his hands. I thought it meant I'd gotten through it. Ruth told me it meant I was stuck. Was she right? Eliza asked. She usually is, he said. It took me about 3 years to admit it. Eliza looked at him. At this man who had carried 4 years of grief without putting it down because he didn't know how. At this man who had read Jane Austen because his mother made him. At this man who swept up broken jars and wrote letters and told her she had changed the outcome of a county hearing and held her hand on a porch in the Kentucky evening without making it mean more than she was ready for it to mean. Nathaniel, she said. He looked up. I think, she stopped, breathed, tried again. I think I am choosing this. He was very still. This, she said, because she needed to be clear, because clarity was safety, and she wanted to do this with her full eyes open. You, this house, this life. A pause. I came here because I had no choice. I know that. But I'm staying, I want to stay, because I'm choosing it. And I needed you to know that those are different. The room was completely quiet. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached across the desk, and she put her hand in his, and he held it, the way he'd held it on the porch. Not possessively, not demonstratively, just steadily, the way he did everything. I know they're different, he said. I've been hoping for the second one. For how long? She asked. He considered it honestly. About 3 weeks after you corrected the accounts ledger, he said, and didn't embarrass Ruth. She laughed. actually laughed a real laugh, not the careful social laugh she'd been performing her whole life, a laugh that came from somewhere undefended. He smiled. A real one. Not the almost smile, not the near smile. A full, unguarded smile that changed his face entirely, and that she decided in that moment was the best thing she'd ever seen. "Nathaniel," she said. You have a very good smile." He looked briefly startled, which was also wonderful. "You could use it more," she said. "I'll take that under advisement," he said. She laughed again. The night before the September hearing, neither of them slept much. Eliza knew because she was awake at midnight and at 2, and she could hear him moving in his room boots coming off late, then the particular quiet of a man lying awake turning things over. At 3 in the morning she knocked on his door. He opened it quickly like he'd been near it, and he was in shirt sleeves, and his expression was equal parts surprised and not surprised. "I can't sleep," she said. "Neither can I," he said. She came in, sat in the chair by the window. He sat on the edge of the bed and they were 6 feet apart in the dark, and it was entirely proper and also entirely different from the first night she'd opened her door to him, which had been approximately 100 years ago and also only 8 weeks. "Tell me what you're worried about," she said. "The actual thing." He was quiet for a moment. "Losing cold water," he said. "Not the land. He stopped. "Margaret chose this land. I built this house for her. Whatever it cost me to stay here after she died, and it cost me this place is the last thing she loved. If Crane takes it—" "He won't," Eliza said. "You don't know that." "No," she said. "But I know we have the survey, and Henry and Price's exposed testimony, and the bank records, and Aldridge, and a judge who has no stake in Crane's outcome." She paused. "We built this case the right way. We closed every gap. What are you worried about that we haven't closed?" He thought about it. "Nothing," he said, and she could hear him working through it, testing it. "Nothing I can identify." "Then what's keeping you awake?" A pause. "The same thing that kept me awake for 4 years, he said. "Caring about something enough to be afraid of losing it." The words landed in the room and sat there. Eliza looked at him in the dark. "What changed?" she asked quietly. 4 years of not caring and then— "You corrected my accounts ledger," he said, "and didn't embarrass Ruth." She pressed her lips together. "Nathaniel," she said. You are going to win this hearing tomorrow, and then we are going to go home, and then we are going to build something on this land that Margaret would have approved of, and that we are choosing together." She paused. "And then you are going to stop being afraid of it, because I need you to show me how, because I'm still learning." He looked at her for a long moment. "I can do that," he said. "Good," she said. She stood, moved toward the door. "Eliza," he said. She turned. "Thank you," he said, "for being here, tonight, all of this." She looked at him, this man who had given her a locked room and cornbread and an accountant's job and a letter to her father and a hand on her hand and a real smile in a study, while she cried, and she felt the full weight of what had been built between them quietly and carefully, and out of the wreckage of 2 people who had both forgotten what it felt like to trust. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. She meant it in every way it could be meant. He knew that. She could see that he knew it. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said. She went back to her room and lay in the dark, and this time, when she checked the room out of habit, door, windows, exits, she found herself doing it automatically, and then stopping and setting it down and breathing. She fell asleep before 4, and she did not wake until morning, when Kentucky came through the windows gold and clear and entirely without apology. And the day of the hearing arrived, and Eliza Hayes got dressed and went downstairs and found her husband at the kitchen table with 2 cups already poured waiting for her. She sat down across from him, picked up her cup. "Ready?" he asked. "Yes," she said. And she was. The courtroom was full. Eliza had not expected that. She had expected the principal's Nathaniel Crane, the attorney's Judge Ferris Henry, as witness, and a handful of the county's obligatory observers. The men who attended every public proceeding because public proceedings were entertainment and information and social currency all at once. She had not expected the room to be standing full, every bench packed people along the walls. She walked in beside Nathaniel and felt the room's attention shift toward them like a single organism turning its head. They came to watch Crane lose, Nathaniel said quietly for her ears only. They came to see what happens next, she said. They don't know yet who wins. He glanced at her sideways. Do you? Yes, she said. She sat down behind the attorney's table, straight-backed and still, and she looked at Silas Crane across the room, and he looked back at her, and she held his gaze without flinching until he looked away first. That was new. 6 weeks. She couldn't hold anyone's gaze for more than 3 seconds. She'd been trained out of it. Eye contact was challenge, and challenge invited consequence. She held Crane's gaze until he looked away. Then she opened her notebook. Judge Ferris called the room to order, and the hearing began, and Eliza listened to the opening arguments and tracked every statement against what she knew, and when Crane's attorney began presenting Price's original testimony, she felt Nathaniel's attorney tense beside her, and she wrote a single word on the corner of her notepad and pushed it across. Wait. He glanced at it, glanced at her. Held. Crane's attorney was building toward something. She could feel it, the particular rhythm of a man who thinks he has a card left to play. The way the argument was stretching itself out toward a point rather than simply making one. The survey conducted by Mr. Hayes's agent, Crane's attorney said, was not independent. We have here, he produced a document, evidence that the surveyor one, Thomas Garrett of Lexington, received payment from the Hayes estate not once but 3 times in the preceding 18 months. This is not an independent professional assessment. This is a hired conclusion. The room shifted. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Eliza wrote 3 words on the notepad. Check the dates. His attorney leaned down to her. What? Check the dates of those payments, she said barely above a whisper. Ask for the specific dates. He looked at her, looked at the document across the room, stood up. Your Honor, we'd like to examine that document before any further argument is made from it. Ferris nodded. The document made its way across. Eliza read it in 11 seconds. The payments, she said quietly to the attorney. First one 14 months ago. What was Garrett doing for Hayes 14 months ago? Nathaniel leaned in. He surveyed the north pasture, he said immediately. For the Henderson purchase. Nothing to do with the southern boundary. Second payment. Drainage assessment, Eastfield. Third. He surveyed the road easement for the county. Hayes estate was one of 4 properties involved. Eliza looked up at the attorney. None of those payments are related to the boundary survey. The prior work establishes a professional relationship, which is normal for any landowner who uses the same surveyor more than once. It doesn't establish bias. She paused. Ask him to specify which of those payments influenced the boundary assessment. He can't answer it because none of them did. The attorney stood up and did exactly that. Crane's attorney hedged, reworded, tried to maintain the implication without the substance. Ferris, who had been on the bench long enough to recognize the difference, looked at him over his glasses and said, Counselor, can you demonstrate a direct connection between those payments and the specific survey at issue? Or are you asking the court to draw an inference? A pause. An inference, Your Honor. Then let's move on, Ferris said. The room exhaled. Eliza wrote good in the margin of her notepad and closed it. Henry took the stand at 11 o'clock and was the best witness Eliza had ever seen in the sense that he was entirely himself, unhurried, unimpressed by the proceedings, answering every question with the same economy of language he used for everything. You've worked the Hayes property for 14 years, the attorney asked. Yep, Henry said. And you were present when the county road work was done in 1816. Yep. Did you observe the location of the southern boundary marker at that time? Yep. Could you describe its location relative to the current survey marker? Henry looked at the ceiling for approximately 2 seconds. Same place, he said. You're certain? I put a fence post 6 inches east of that marker in the spring of 1815, Henry said. It's still there. I know where I put things. The room was quiet. Crane's attorney rose for cross. Mr. Henry, Henry said. A slight pause. Mr. Henry, is it possible the marker was moved before your fence post went in? Nope. How can you be certain? Because I helped set that marker in 1812, Henry said. With Nathaniel's father, with a transit and a chain and 2 witnesses. Same place it's always been. Crane's attorney sat down. Nathaniel's attorney turned and looked at Eliza. She gave him the smallest nod. He turned back to the room. No further questions for this witness, Your Honor. It was at noon that Crane made his mistake. Ferris had called a brief recess, and the room had loosened slightly. People standing, moving, the low roar of conversation filling the air. Eliza was reviewing her notes when she felt a presence beside her and looked up to find Silas Crane standing 3 feet away. He had dismissed his attorney with a gesture, and he was looking at her with the expression she recognized from men who had underestimated her and were now in the process of overcompensating. Mrs. Hayes, he said, quiet, civil, entirely dangerous. She looked at him, said nothing. You're very clever, he said. I'll grant you that. Thank you, she said pleasantly. It won't change the outcome, he said. Your husband has a note in Louisville that comes due in 60 days. Even if he wins today, that note was purchased from the Louisville Commercial Bank at a 32% discount. Eliza said, authorized by a judge who has since recused himself from this case due to conflict of interest, and the transaction records are currently with Sheriff Aldridge and the State Judicial Oversight Board. She tilted her head slightly. I imagine whoever holds that note now is having a very uncomfortable week. Crane stared at her. The note will be called in, he said, but the certainty had fractured slightly at the edges. The note is being reviewed for fraudulent transfer, she said, which tends to complicate collection efforts. She closed her notebook. Mr. Crane, I grew up watching my father lose. I know exactly what it looks like when a man's plan stops working. You're there right now. His face did something complicated and ugly. You were a debt payment, he said, low and vicious. That's all you were. That's all you are. She looked at him. She felt the words try to land, felt the old machinery start up, the flinch, the contraction. She felt it, and she felt something else underneath it. Something that had been building since a kitchen at 2 a.m, and a letter from her mother, and a real smile in a study, and a hand held on a porch. She felt solid. I was, she said. And I made myself into something else. You should try it. She turned back to her notebook. Nathaniel was beside her before Crane had taken 2 steps away. She hadn't seen him move. He was simply there the way he was always simply there. What did he say? Nathaniel asked. The note, she said. He's worried about the note. Is he right to be? No, she said. Whitmore filed the fraudulent transfer challenge yesterday morning. I was quiet for a moment. You didn't tell me that. I'm telling you now, she said. I didn't want you to think about it before the hearing. He looked at her. I said don't manage things alone, he said. I know, she said. I'm learning. I'm not perfect at it yet. He held her gaze. Neither am I, he said. She nodded. Then we're even. The gavel came down, and Ferris called the room back to order, and Eliza put Crane out of her mind entirely and turned her full attention to what mattered. The ruling came at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Ferris read it in the flat, methodical tone of a man who had made his decision before he sat down and was now simply performing the necessary formality of delivering it. The boundary survey was upheld. The marker location was confirmed. The Hayes southern boundary stood exactly where it had always stood. Crane's claim was dismissed. Court costs to the opposing party. The room erupted, not dramatically. This was a county hearing, not a theater, but in the particular way of a room full of people who had been holding something and were now letting it go. Voices, movement, the scrape of benches. Eliza sat very still. She heard the ruling, heard the room, felt Nathaniel beside her, felt the stillness go out of him in a long, controlled exhale, felt him reach over and put his hand over hers on the table. The same gesture she'd made on the porch returned. She turned her hand over and held his. She looked across the room at Silas Crane, who was speaking in a low, furious voice to his attorney, who was nodding with the expression of a man whose bill was about to be very difficult to collect. She looked at him, and she felt nothing dramatic, no triumph, no satisfaction, no particular heat. Just the clean, complete feeling of something finished. "It's over," Nathaniel said quietly. "This part," she said. He looked at her. "The note challenge," she said. "Whitmore will need 2 more weeks on that." He exhaled something that was almost a laugh. "Of course." "Then it's over," she said. "I promise." He brought her hand up briefly, carefully pressed his mouth to her knuckles, the most unguarded thing she had ever seen him do in public, and looked at her over their joined hands with those gray, steady eyes. "Let's go home," he said. "Yes," she said. "Let's." They were halfway to Coldwater when Eliza started talking. Not about the hearing, they'd covered that in the first 20 minutes, efficient and thorough, the debrief of 2 people who processed things by discussing them. She started talking about something else. She wasn't sure why. The motion of the carriage, maybe. The particular quality of the late afternoon light. The fact that the thing she'd been afraid of for weeks had just turned out all right, and all the air she'd been holding was looking for somewhere to go. "I had a plan," she said, "before the wedding, when my father told me about the arrangement." Nathaniel looked at her. "I had a plan for how to survive it," she said. "I was going to be invisible. Good enough to keep. Not good enough to be interesting. I was going to manage the house and stay out of the way and not cause any trouble and count the days until I don't know. Until something changed. Until I figured out an exit that didn't destroy my mother's situation." He was quiet. "I had a whole architecture," she said, "for how to be in this marriage without being in it." She looked out the window. "I had it completely planned by the day I arrived." "What happened to it?" he asked. "You swept up the broken jar," she said. He said nothing. "And you didn't explain that the books were mine," she said. "You just said they were. And you made Ruth get blackberry jam." She turned and looked at him. "You kept doing ordinary things like they were ordinary, and I didn't know how to incorporate that into the architecture, so the architecture kept falling apart, and eventually I stopped trying to rebuild it." He looked at her steadily. "I'm glad the architecture fell apart," he said. "So am I," she said. Now, she looked at her hands in her lap. "I was so angry at my father," she said, "for so long. And then for a while I stopped being angry and just became careful. Like anger was a luxury I couldn't afford." She paused. "I'm angry again now. I think that's healthy." "Ruth would agree," Nathaniel said. "Ruth agrees with most true things," Eliza said. "That's why she's terrifying." He smiled, the real one, the one that changed his face. She still wasn't used to it. She wasn't sure she'd ever be fully used to it, which was, she thought, probably a good thing. The things that still surprised you were the things still worth paying attention to. "Nathaniel," she said. What was Margaret like?" How was quiet for a moment. Not painfully quiet, she'd learned the difference between his silences. This was the quiet of a man who was thinking about something he was willing to share. "She was direct," he said, laughed loudly, had opinions about everything, and stated them immediately. A pause. "She would have disagreed with you about the architecture." "What do you mean?" "She'd have said you shouldn't have needed one," he said, "that you should have walked into that house knowing you were worth something." He paused. "She was right about most things. But she had a different kind of life. She knew she was worth something because people had been telling her so since she was born." He looked out the window. "Not everyone gets that." Eliza sat with that. "She sounds wonderful," she said. "She was," he said simply. "You would have liked each other, I think. You're different, but you have the same core, the same unwillingness to accept a smaller version of things." She looked at him. "Is that what you see in me?" she asked. "Among other things," he said. She looked back out the window. Kentucky rolled past green and gold, the summer starting to ease toward the first hints of autumn in the quality of the light. "I want to write to my mother," she said. "Not just letters. I want her to come here, to visit, for as long as she wants." "Done," he said. Just like that. Just like that, he said. This is her daughter's house. She should see it. Eliza breathed. I want to fix the account system properly, she said. Not just correct what's there. Build something new that Ruth can maintain without me if she needs to, with clear categories and monthly reconciliation. Done, he said. I want... She stopped, looked at him. You're going to say done to everything, aren't you? Probably, he said. Don't, she said. Say no to things that should be no. I need to know you'll say no. He considered this seriously, the way he considered everything serious. The ledger reorganization, he said. Not done, not yet. I want to look at it first. The current system isn't as broken as you think. She blinked. The Eastern Field accounts are actually well structured, he said. Ruth developed that herself. If you rebuild from scratch, you'll lose those categories, and she won't tell you they were good because she won't want to seem like she's resisting. Eliza thought about that. You're right, she said. I know the property better than you do yet, he said. And you know numbers better than I do. We should do it together. She looked at him. Yes, she said. We should. Coldwater came into view at dusk, and Ruth was on the porch before the carriage had fully stopped, which meant she'd been watching the road, which she would deny if asked. Well, Ruth said. We won, Nathaniel said. Ruth's eyebrows performed a small private celebration. Good, she said. Supper's been ready for an hour. Come inside. That was Ruth's version of welcome home. They came inside. The twist arrived 2 days later in the form of a letter from Whitmore in Louisville, and it was not the letter Eliza had expected. She read it at the breakfast table, read it again, handed it to Nathaniel. He read it, set it down. Crane sold the note, he said. Yesterday, she said. Before the fraudulent transfer challenge could be formalized. He found a buyer legitimate, no connection to Callaway, and sold it at face value. Which means the challenge is complicated, she said. The new holder is a clean party. They purchased in good faith. She pressed her lips together. Whitmore says we can still pursue the original transaction as fraud, but the note itself is now legitimately held and comes due in 58 days. The silence stretched. How much? Nathaniel asked. She told him. He absorbed it. She watched him do the arithmetic in his head. She'd seen him do it before, the quiet, rapid calculation of a man who kept his finances in his head, as well as on paper. I can cover it, he said. It will take everything liquid, and I'll need to delay 2 projects on the North Field. But I can cover it. I know, she said. He looked at her. I already worked it out, she said, before you woke up this morning. She slid her own paper across the table. The numbers laid out the sources, identified the timeline mapped. This way, you lose the Northfield projects, but keep the South expansion, which matters more for next year's yield. He looked at her paper for a long moment. Then he looked at her. You did this before breakfast, he said. I woke early, she said. Eliza. I couldn't sleep, she said. And I needed something to do with the worrying. He picked up her paper, studied it. You moved the Henderson payment forward. Henderson owes you for last month's grain delivery, she said. He's 3 weeks late. Collect it now, and it covers the gap in the South expansion. Henderson is slow, but he always pays, Nathaniel said. I know, she said. Ruth told me. But slow doesn't help us in 58 days. He was quiet, reading through her numbers. The margin here, he said, pointing. You left yourself no room. You, she said. I left us no room. And I know. But the alternative is the Northfield delay, and you care about that more than you've said. He looked up. How did you know that? He asked. Because you walk the Northfield every morning, she said. Before anything else. The Southfield you check on your way to something else. The Northfield is where you go first. He was quiet. It's where Margaret's grave is, he said. She held very still. Not morbidly, he said. I planted the apple trees there. She wanted an orchard. I never got to finish it while she was alive. I've been finishing it. He paused. The Northfield project is the last section of the orchard. Eliza looked at her numbers on the table. Then she picked up the paper and rewrote 2 lines. Then we delay something else, she said. The fencing on the west pasture. Henry said it's sturdy for another season. He did say that, Nathaniel said slowly. Then we do it this way, she said. She pushed the revised paper back. Northfield stays. West fence waits. Henderson pays his debt. We cover the note. He looked at the paper, looked at her. You knew about Margaret's grave, he said. Ruth told me where it was, she said. She thought I should know. I was quiet for a long moment. She was right, he said. She usually is, Eliza said. He folded this paper carefully and put it in his breast pocket. Close, she noticed. Not on the table, not on the stack of documents. In his pocket. I'll ride to Henderson today, he said. Tell him the grain price will adjust at the next delivery if he's late again, she said. He looked at her. That's harsh. That's a boundary, she said. And he'll respect it. He almost smiled. You've been talking to Ruth. Ruth is very wise, Eliza said. I'm learning from the best. He stood from the table, reached over and touched her face briefly carefully, his thumb against her cheek. The first time he'd touched her face, and she did not flinch. She leaned into it just slightly, just for a second. He dropped his hand. I'll be back by noon, he said. I'll have the accounts ready, she said. He nodded, went for his coat. Nathaniel, she said. He turned. The orchard, she said. When it's done, I'd like to see it. He looked at her. I'd like that too, he said. It was Ruth who said it plainly the way Ruth said everything. October arrived, and the Kentucky air finally surrendered its summer heat, and the Coldwater estate moved into the rhythms of harvest season. Longer hours, more hands, the particular productive chaos of a working farm at its busiest. Eliza had been managing the household accounts through all of it, tracking expenses and income with the precise attention she'd brought to everything since that first corrected ledger. And she had started sitting in on Nathaniel's weekly meetings with Henry, because the farm accounts and household accounts intersected in ways that mattered, and Henry had stopped looking surprised by her presence approximately 3 weeks ago. Ruth cornered her in the kitchen on a Thursday morning. You're happy, Ruth said. Not a question. Eliza turned from the stove. Yes, she said. I think I am. You think, Ruth said. I'm still getting used to it, Eliza said. Being happy, it's new. Ruth looked at her with those direct gray eyes that had assessed her on the first day, and had been quietly revising their assessment ever since. He's happy too, Ruth said. In case you're wondering, first time in 4 years I've heard him laugh in this house. She picked up her cup. That's your doing. It's not, Eliza started. Don't diminish it, Ruth said. You did that. Own it. Eliza held that. All right, she said. I own it. Ruth nodded once. Good. Now, the winter provisions. I need you to look at the grain contracts before Nathaniel signs them next week, because last year he overpaid and he won't admit it. Eliza almost laughed. Leave them on the desk. I'll look tonight. Tonight, Ruth repeated with a tone that had opinions about tonight. He and I are finishing the orchard accounts after supper, Eliza said. It might be late. Ruth's eyebrows moved in a way that conveyed approximately 4 different things at once. I'll leave them on the desk, she said, and left. The final hearing on the Crane matter, the fraudulent transfer case, concluded in November. Whitmore had been thorough as promised. The original transaction between Callaway's bank and Crane was ruled a fraudulent conveyance. Crane was required to compensate Nathaniel for legal costs and the full face value of the note, which he paid through gritted teeth, and the sale of the southern property that had started this entire proceeding. Callaway stepped down from the bench quietly without announcement 3 weeks before the ruling came through. Nobody in Harlan County pretended to be surprised. Eliza heard the final ruling in Whitmore's office in Louisville and sat with it for a moment, feeling the weight of the months, the summer hearing and the midnight warrant and the Louisville trip and her mother's letter and the kitchen at 2 in the morning, settle and resolve into something complete. That's everything, she asked Whitmore. That's everything, he said. Crane has no remaining legal standing. The note is discharged. The boundary stands. He looked at her. Mrs. Hayes, it has been an education working with you. Thank you, she said. She looked at Nathaniel beside her. Howe was looking at her, the way he'd been looking at her for months now, openly, without the guard, without the careful management of expression she'd first encountered in this man. He looked at her the way a man looked when he'd stopped being afraid of what he was feeling. She knew that look. She was starting to wear it herself. Ready? He asked. I've been ready, she said. The orchard was finished in November, the last section of apple trees planted in the north field on a cold, clear morning when the ground was still soft enough to work, and the sky was the particular blue that Kentucky saved for its best days. Nathaniel showed her where Margaret's grave was a simple stone under an old walnut tree at the edge of the field, quiet and permanent. He stood beside it for a moment, and she stood beside him, and she didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say that the standing didn't already say. Then he turned and walked her through the orchard. All of it, the old sections, and the new, explaining which varieties he'd planted, where and why the particular ambitions he had for the yield in 3 years when the new trees matured. He talked about it the way he talked about everything he cared about, precisely with specificity, with the particular warmth of someone who had tended something through grief and was still tending it. She listened to every word. She would have loved it, Eliza said when he'd finished. She would have had opinions about the spacing, he said. Of course she would, Eliza said. You probably had them wrong. He looked at her. She raised her eyebrows. He laughed a real laugh, full unguarded the laugh of a man who had remembered how. It went out into the cold November air, and the orchard held it for a moment before letting it go. She thought, I am going to remember this. This exact moment. The blue sky and the apple trees and that sound. She was going to remember it for the rest of her life. He reached over and took her hand. Not brief this time. Not careful. He held it the way you held something you intended to keep. Eliza, he said. I love you. He said it the way he said everything that was simply true, plainly, directly, with no decoration and no qualification, the way a man stated a fact he had thoroughly examined and found to be accurate. She turned and looked at him. She felt the words arrive in her chest and settle there in the places that had been compressed and careful and afraid for so long, and she felt them fit. Not because she needed them, not because she was waiting for them, not because they completed some lack. Because they were true, and she recognized them as true, and she had been building toward them too. I know, she said. He raised an eyebrow. I've known for a while, she said. I was waiting for you to say it. Why didn't you say it first? He asked. She considered. Because I wanted you to have it, she said. The saying of it. You've been carrying so much quietly for so long. I wanted you to be the one to put that particular thing down out loud. He looked at her for a long moment. That is the most. He stopped, shook his head. Eliza. I love you too, she said. In case that wasn't clear. It was clear, he said. For weeks. Then we both knew, she said. And now we've both said it. Yes, he said. Good, she said. He pulled her into him, not dramatically, not as a performance, just the simple direct gesture of a man closing a distance he'd been carefully maintaining, and she went and she stood with her face against his shoulder and his arm around her and the November orchard around them, and she breathed. She breathed without counting exits. She breathed without calculating trajectories. She breathed like a woman who was exactly where she intended to be in a life she had not been given but had built on ground she had fought for and won beside a man who had seen her clearly from the moment the light caught what she'd been hiding and had chosen her anyway. Not the version of her that was manageable or convenient or safely small, but the full complicated ledger-correcting warrant-challenging 2 in the morning cornbread-eating truth of her. She had arrived at Coldwater a debt. She had become something entirely different. She had become the woman who made Coldwater home, and that all of it, every hard-won inch of it, was entirely irrevocably her.